What is up, guys? Malcolm back again for part 2 of our hologram tutorial. So where we left off is we finished modeling all of this scene here, doing some animating to make this kind of cool hologram effect where it just kind of bursts into existence, and then we got these cool spaceships coming up, and it's looking pretty good. So in this tutorial now we're going to be compositing this over our live action footage and making it look really good. So yeah, let's get started. So we do have quite a bit to do. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go up here and hit this button here, the little plus item, and that's going to add a new workspace. So from here we're going to go into VFX. One of the cool features of Blender 2.8 is now it has a VFX option built right in. You could do a lot of this stuff before, but it's just a little bit easier to get to. So we're going to click motion tracking. So now from here, what we need to do is open up our footage. So just locate where you've saved your footage. It's going to take me a second to find mine. I believe it's this one. Yeah, okay, that's my footage right there. So now we got our footage in here. That's great. Now I can start motion tracking. So it's actually a pretty simple process. It's actually a lot easier than you would think. So what we're going to do is just go to the track tab here, up in the top corner. You can see the whole workspace changed also when we picked motion tracking. So definitely pretty different than the previous scene. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a point in and track. So, first thing we want to do is if we try to scrub through this, it's going to be kind of laggy, and we don't really want that. So right up here by the clip text, you can just see right underneath it says prefetch, and what that's going to do is load all of this video clip into our RAM. It's just going to make it go a lot quicker now. One thing you may want to do is size down your clip to just the portion you want the effect to take place. That seems to work better. It just makes it a lot easier to work with. So I'd recommend doing that. One other setting we're going to change is right here under match. Instead of selecting keyframe, we're going to select previous frame. And the way this works is if we choose keyframe, it's going to essentially it's going to only look at the first frame and try to match it with the first frame that we put the track on, which is going to mean it's going to lose the track a lot more frequently. So we don't really want that. So just from testing this is the perfect point for this particular track on my object. Your scene's obviously going to be very different. You might have some issues tracking, but we're just going to hit the track button here. It's also over in the track tab right here under track. We're just going to hit this, track markers, track selected markers. And we'll see if it works the same as it did the first time I used it. This should pretty much perfectly follow. Whoops. I don't want to do that. I accidentally almost moved a keyframe. So, there we go. I just got to scale this up to fit my scene because my scene is a little bit longer than yours will probably be. But anyway, so what we can do now is we can go in here and we can go over to. I got to make sure our track's selected. Yeah, okay, good. And then go to the track tab, and if we hit this button right here, lock to selection, just right over here, it's going to lock it right to our view, which is great. So now we can see, was this a good track? Did it actually work? And in this case, it's pretty good. You know, it's holding pretty close. We can also see a little window here that shows you a really zoomed in view. You can see how good the track is. It might be moving the tiniest bit, but overall it's pretty good. Only really at the end does it go off a tiny bit, and even then it's probably not going to be noticeable. So we got lucky with this one. Don't need to do any further tracking. I made it all the way from the beginning to the end frame. If you do end up losing it midway through, what you can do is just wherever it loses it, you can just hit G and then move it to where it needs to be, and then you can keep tracking. So just something to keep in mind. Now what we're going to do is basically turn this into an empty into our scene. So there's an option over here where basically if we go to the solve option, we can go to geometry and go link empty to track. Now the only issue with doing that now is we don't have a camera in our scene, so we're going to need to add a camera first. So let's go back to the layout mode. Everything's going to be there right where we left it, and we're going to go Shift A, add, and add our camera in. Okay, I'm just going to pull this back on, I guess the X-axis is good. Alright, so we're going to pull that with G and then X. Now it's back on the X-axis. Now we're just going to go in here into this item. We're just going to change the rotation of this. For whatever reason, it puts it at this kind of weird angle, which I don't really like for the default camera rotation. There's probably a way to change that actually, which would for sure be kind of nice to be able to do. Let's see if I set this to 0. Okay, that's not really what I want. Okay, we're actually going to move this just on here. It's not really that big of a deal, but you know, it just yeah, okay, we're just going to leave it. I'm just going to rotate this on Z, make it 90. So you just basically want it to face your object kind of roughly. You can go into camera view and get it a little bit closer to what we want it to be, just by kind of getting the location and pulling it back. So that's roughly the scale of our object in the scene. Not really that important right now, but it's going to be important in a second here. So, all right, so we got our camera now. It's looking good. Now if we go back to motion tracking, I don't know if you need this selected or not. We're just going to select it just in case. Now if we go link empty to track, what you're going to see is, look, there's a little empty here that's appeared in our scene. And if we go back to layout view and go to press 0 to go into camera view, I don't know if the camera is set to the right focal length. Let's have a look here. Definitely want to make sure of that. Camera focal length. Okay, good. It's set to 50 millimeters, which in my case is my focal length. And you're going to see that this little empty follows exactly where we want it to, which is great. That's great. That's exactly what we wanted to do. So the only problem is now we need this to follow that empty. So if we go in here, next thing we want to do actually is go select the camera. If we click background images, we're basically done in the motion tracker. If it worked as well as it did for me, for you, then you're good. If not, you know, maybe I'll make a more in-depth motion tracking tutorial. There are some other good ones out there that you can certainly check out, that are certainly going to be able to give you any help if you run into any issues with motion tracking. But anyways, what we're going to do is we clicked the background images option in the camera settings, and we just selected our movie clip under the movie clip option. So now we can see that we got our movie clip and we got our track right there. So now all we need to do is pair this, every object that we have here, and this will work better once everything's full size, because otherwise we're going to run into some issues. But basically this is going to work. What we're going to do first though is we're going to hide these two grid lines, just because it's going to make it easier for now. Now there's one thing we need to do with this that's a little bit important. We just need to make sure that this is parented to this first. Control P, and we're going to keep the transform. I'm just going to make sure this is still rotating the way it should, just because if you don't do that right, when it scales up all these objects, it gets a little confused, you know. So you just got to make sure that it's parented to something else first, and then what we're going to do is parent all that to that. So now we're just going to select everything and position it where we want it. Actually, I might just do this from the camera view, honestly. All right, so we're going to select absolutely everything here. Oh, actually, sorry. First thing I want to do is add another empty. And the reason for this empty is going to control basically exactly where we want this object to be. So we're just going to put it right there. Only thing we want to make sure of, which it looks like it's already pretty much good, is that this is on the same axes as this. Because if we put it way over here, obviously it's not going to track properly. So it's got to be right there. Okay, so that's good. We want that. Now this is the point that's going to be right on there. First thing I'm going to do, actually, just to make this a little bit clearer, is we're going to select this point, and then select, oh, it's kind of hard to do in the camera view. All right, so we're going to select this one empty, and then select our track, and then Control P, parent to object. And now that's also going to follow wherever that goes. So that's good. That's what we want. Let's just make sure right at the beginning it's right where we want it to be. It looks like it is. Yeah, that's pretty good. That should work. All right. Now we're going to go make sure all this is expanded first, just because this is kind of an important step that's going to kind of make sure everything works okay here. So we're just going to select, we're just going to select everything just to make sure we don't miss any of these spaceships or any of these other details. And we're going to select all that. Just make sure you deselect the camera. Just kind of switching views here. Go back to camera view. Let's position this where we want it. Now for this particular track, we're not tracking the rotation of the objects. You know, there are ways you can do that, but this is just going to be staying perfectly vertical. You know, it's a sci-fi effect. Maybe it's a fancy type of object that just doesn't get affected by you know, the orientation of this device. It's got a gyroscope built in. You know, why not? All right, now we're going to click set parent to object, and we're going to go keep transform, and I think this should work. Let's go ahead and see here. All right, there we go. So now we can see, look, our object's parented. The only issue is And I did this actually on my test, that I'm kind of annoyed by. But the only issue is that the objects that go up there are not staying with it. So for whatever reason, it loses the parent of these two to that. So what we're going to have to do is I just hid those other objects. And we're going to select our rotation empty, Control P again, parent to object, keep transform. Okay, so now if we go back, it should be working. So just had to reparent those. Yeah, okay, so now it's working. You know, the position might have gotten moved. You can go in and adjust that though. Keep in mind, it's not the end of the world if it got shifted a little bit off of where it was supposed to be. All right, we're going to go back in here and into the track. This we're going to rename to call it hologram, since everything in our hologram effect is now in there. And we're going to go in and turn on the grids. So now we got our grids in there. Great, that's looking good. It's tracking it nicely. All right, perfect. So that's our track done. Now in my example, I also did a few things to kind of make this effect a little bit more dramatic here. So first thing I did is I made this kind of zoom up from nothing. So we'll make it like right here, it's at full intensity. So we'll go ahead, and all I'm going to need to do to animate this now is just grab that little keyframe, or that empty that we made, and call it hologram. So if I can take that and then we go back down and we go right to when I made my silly face that this thing's going to explode right in front of me. Actually, I think it was right when that light turned on. Okay, so now I'm going to scale this down to almost nothing. So we're going to scale this down all the way till it's like a little blob. And we're going to insert a keyframe. Alright, so now, let's see, it does that. And we want it to go a little bit quicker than that, just for my testing, I think. That looks a little bit better if it goes a little more quickly. So I'm just going to go in here. So now, see, it comes up into play a lot more quickly. Other thing I did is I'll show you a cool technique that I did for this. So we scale it just on the y-axis. You can do something pretty cool here. So if we get it just down to that, and then we insert a keyframe, or replace the keyframe rather, we can make it just expand on that one axis, and then once it's up, right there, we'll have it go out to 1. So once again, all I'm doing there is I'm just scaling this empty here on the y-axis. Everything's parented to it, so everything underneath there is getting parented, and then you get that kind of cool effect where it just kind of expands on you there, which is great. So that looks good. What we're going to do is just grab all these keyframes, close it off, and then I think you guys get the idea. I'm going to probably go to compositing from here. Whoops. Actually, I just want to do Shift D. I always forget that you can't do Control C, Control V on that. Actually, oh, look at that. Okay, so I can just scale that. So I just hit scale, and all I did was scale it in the negative. So I just flipped this. So this one would go there, and then that one would go there, and then that one would go there. We'll see, but I think that worked. We'll see. Yeah, okay, so there we go. So this is the effect. You get the picture there. Now we're going to go into compositing. So the only issue we have now is we need this to get over our footage. So if we go and render this, we're not going to get an image here, basically. I mean, we will, but we won't get our background, we won't get our video, we won't get anything. We'll just get this, you know, this object that's just kind of, you know, floating around. So that's not what we want. So what we need to do first is we need to go into the Eevee rendering settings, and right here under the film option, there's an option for transparent. And what this is going to do is if we go and render again, I'll show you. Alright, we rendered again, and now the background is transparent, so we're getting somewhere. So now that that's transparent, the other thing we can do is we can also go in here and start doing some compositing. So what I'm going to do is to render an image again, just make sure it's all done there. So that's been rendered, and then we're going to go into compositing and click Use Nodes. Okay, so now we're starting to composite. So one thing we want to do is go Shift A, Add, and then Output Viewer. And now this is going to allow us to view what we're doing on the fly. We'll go ahead and grab that. Okay, and then we'll go into this option here, View, and then Fit, because it's not quite fitting in the view there. So that looks good. Now what we're going to do is we got to add our movie clip in here. So we're going to go input, and then we're going to pick movie clip. We're going to select our movie clip that we've already loaded into our project when we did our motion tracking and all that. So that's already stored in this project. And then we're going to add a, where is this one? I'm just going to search for it. We're going to add a scale node. Now what this does, it just makes sure that if we scale down our image, it's going to stay the same size. So that's kind of a little important. You could do it without this, but the issue is if you ever render it, say like half resolution, it's going to screw up the whole thing basically because the scale is going to be off. It's hard to explain, but essentially this is something that, you know, we definitely need to do. Alright, so let's grab that as well. So now we got both of these scaling, and all I did was select render size here. And what that does is it tells Blender, okay, scale this object whatever the render size is. So if we change it, it's not going to screw anything up. Okay, so I'm just going to look at my cheat sheet here. Okay, so first thing I did was I created this kind of blur effect for this. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that. I'll create this blur effect. I'm just going to turn this off of the composite here. Okay, so now we're going to add in a filter blur. Okay, so now we got a blur in here, and a Gaussian blur should be good. Now just with my settings here, just give you a start. So putting 6 on the X, 3 on the Y, and we should be able to see on the fly what this is doing. Now I need a really large size because I'm using small values here. Use really large values for these. You might need a other size. Now the issue we're having is you can see it's creating this blur effect, but it's not quite doing what we want it to do. And the reason for that is because we need a black background to remove the alpha of this. So we're going to do that. We're going to go ahead and add a filter. Where is that? Where's it? Okay, I'm just going to search for it. That's one great feature is you can search for things quite quickly. So I'm just going to add in an alpha over. And what we're going to do is just select a black background instead of a white background. And what we're going to see happen is we're going to create this nice diffuse blur, essentially. We'll see if this is the wrong way. I think it's the wrong way around. Let's go ahead and flip that. I got to pick that. Alright. So I believe the bottom one goes over that image. So, yeah, okay, so that's what we want. So now we got this really, really blurred kind of mask here. This is going to be lighting our scene. So this is the lighting that we're creating for their scene. One other thing I'm going to add is add a color, brightness, contrast. And I'm just going to use the settings I used for my last project. It was about 20 on here. And that's just going to make a little bit more contrast to the scene, which can look kind of cool. You know what? I'm just going to do this by eye because I already know that that's not going to really work the way I want it to. You want it to be kind of this really spread out, blurred color. I might even turn up the brightness a little bit. Let's turn up the brightness and then turn up the contrast as well. Alright, that's a start. That'll look okay, trust me. It doesn't look like much right now, but now what we're going to do is we are going to add a mix node. Oops. Where is, I guess, converter under that? No, filter. I'm so bad at remembering what tab is it under. Color, sorry, it's under color. Color mix, and then we're going to connect that up there. Didn't quite connect. I might end up having to lower the resolution that we're compositing at for now, just to make it a little bit easier, but I think this will be okay. So instead of mix, though, what we want to do is click add. What it's going to do is add this lighting over top of our background image, which is just going to give a really nice look. So go ahead and put that in like that. And now we can see we've got this kind of blurred lighting image, which doesn't look that great, but bear with me here, We're about to get this thing looking pretty good. Okay, so we got that on there. That looks good. Next thing we're going to do is just add another brightness contrast. I just found that putting it after this just allows a little more control. I'll copy the same settings I had before at my last project, which was 25 and I think 50 on this. So quite high values. You might be able to find a way to use a little bit lower values, but I think convert pre-multiply looked better on this. Okay. that's a start. You know, it's not perfect just yet. One thing we do want to do actually is the factor this is just too intense. If we go 0.2 on this, I think that's about what I used on my original. There we go. So now you can see it's a lot more subtle what's going on with the image here. So it's definitely what we want. And we say turn this up a little bit. We might be able to go a little bit further with this now. Yeah, okay, so now you can see if I turn that contrast up, we get a much cooler effect. I might want to actually turn this up a little bit more. The thing is, we got to go in and actually tweak our emission settings because it's not really quite set up right. That's the one thing you got to keep in mind is the emission settings need to be quite high to get this kind of blooming light throughout the scene. So, but that'll work for the sake of this tutorial. But I would definitely recommend doing that, just brightening up the bloom effects by increasing the emission strength of pretty much all your materials. But you know, that's just how it goes basically. It's just good. This is a tip basically if you want to customize this a little bit. Okay, so now we're gonna basically put our render layer over top of it. So all I did was I duplicated this. In fact, we're gonna actually need to duplicate our scale. Now we don't need the alpha over node on this. Well, we're gonna need it a bit later actually, but all right. Load the image into here, and just in my testing, also adding a bit of a blur to it definitely was a good thing. So if I go in here to filter blur, this is just a slight blur. Anything CGI is not going to match 100% with anything shot with a real camera lens, just because a camera lens is not perfectly sharp. It's going to have issues with the lens, and it's naturally is going to lose a bit of sharpness. So if we add a slight blur, it can definitely give us some better results. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just set this to bokeh, which is going to kind of give me a more natural kind of lensed type of blur. And in my experience, just setting this to roughly those settings, 1 and 0.1, it kind of stretches out the blur in a more natural way. And we're going to add a color, brightness, contrast there. I apologize if this video is kind of dragging on. It's just I want to really make it clear what I'm doing as I'm doing it. I don't want to just be doing random things and not explaining it. So yeah, this is one of the ones where I just need to go a little bit slower, I think. Okay, so now we're going to add another alpha over right at the end, and this is going to allow us to composite this over top of this entire image that we've created. Now obviously it's not really working properly, so what we need to do is just put the alpha over right there, and then this image is going to be placed over top of the other one, and we should get a pretty nice result. Now it looks like I went a little far with the blur for sure. As you can tell, that's pretty blurred. Definitely don't want to do that. So all we need to do is just basically lower these values. Oh, I see. I just missed an option here. I just had the size set way too high, so it has an option here for size. Set that to 0.2. And now you can see that's basically our effect there. So yeah, this is pretty much all I'm going to cover for compositing. I'm just going to go over kind of everything we have here because it looks complicated, but trust me, this thing is actually pretty simple. So I'm just going to kind of move each of these just by using the box select tool to kind of separate them a little bit. So this is actually a pretty simple effect that we've accomplished here with minimal number of nodes. I tried to use as few as possible. A couple, brightness and contrast nodes that had to kind of get put in there. So what we do is we have this blur that we create by doing all these nodes here. I'll go slowly so you can see all of them, all the settings. And then we have our movie clip right at the bottom there. And then the the add effect to that, which is creating our lighting, which is lighting up, my face and the background and trying to do the best job it can, essentially to make it look a little more natural. But obviously you could have used actual lights and made it actually more physically real, but we're not going to do that in this tutorial. All right, so now what you can see is then we have another render layer. This is going to basically this right here over top of it with an alpha over node. So I hope that makes sense. I hope everybody can kind of follow along to what that is there. If you do need to go back and check through again, definitely feel free. One thing I'm going to do is I am going to bump up these, and just get a better looking material for this little thing. So honestly, like, you can go pretty far with this. I don't know if I'd go quite to 10, but I think I'm going to set this to like 9, because you really want this thing to be a pretty dramatic effect, especially this one. I want this to be a lot more dramatic, so I'm just going to open up the shader editor again. Maybe set this to like 3. We'll see what that looks like. I probably should have split the window, but let's just see. What does that look like with 3? Okay, that looks a lot better. It's going to be less dramatic in the render. I don't know why it seems to be like that, but once you start compositing it over footage, it just doesn't seem to be as bright as it was. That looks good though. I think we'll get a better result here, so we're just going to do another render here. Could also, what else are we going to do actually to get a little bit better result? It's such a pain to select those inner objects, but it just looks so good when you have, you know, those extra grid lines. So all I'm doing though is just selecting these objects and just bumping up the emission of them to kind of add a little more color to the scene. Okay, so we did that. Let's go here, render image, and let's see how this comes out. I may need to tweak a few things in the compositor to make this look better. Oh, I think I forgot to connect the composite option. So let's go ahead and you can see though that you can definitely see the effect a lot better. So, you know, essentially boosting up the emission settings really makes a big difference there. Really can help sell the effect a lot better. So I'll go ahead and do one more quick render and just see what it looks like when it's all composited. Yeah, there you go. So now you can see the effect. You know, maybe you don't want green because green is a bit of a gross color, but you know, I just wanted to change it up and do something a little bit different. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry, I'll show you one last thing. So if you want to render this out into a animation, which you probably want to do, it's pretty easy to do. All you need to do, you could also turn on some of these settings. Let's turn on screen space reflections and a couple of the other ones. And yeah, that's going to be good. All you need to do is go to this tab here and then choose your output setting. So start frame, end frame. Usually it's kind of set up once you do all the motion tracking. It should already basically be set up. Just choose where you want it to save to. I'm just going to save this to the desktop for now, just because I don't have. We got to finish up this tutorial here, but save it wherever you want. And you know, if you wanted to do more compositing in another piece of software, you could definitely you know, move it over there. But if you don't want to, what I found works best, you know, for if you still want to do video editing, and let's say Premiere or After Effects or something along those lines, an AVI RAW will give you really good quality. It won't give you any audio, unfortunately, but you know, usually you can kind of get your audio from your video, you know, before you did all this editing. So. Okay, so now all we need to do is go render animation. So we're going to go ahead and do that and see how it comes out. Alright, so I'm just going to stop the video and I'll show you guys the final result. Okay, so our animation's all done rendering now. Let's go load it up and see how it came out. So here you can see this is the completely rendered result, and it's tracked quite well there. Of course, there are ways you could improve this. This is pretty sloppy just because I wanted to keep the tutorial from running too long, just to kind of let you guys show how I did it and allow you guys to kind of have fun and experiment with it. Of course, you could definitely improve this. You could do some masking to this area, or maybe do some masking for the lighting to kind of control the lighting a little bit more. And actually, I ended up, after this, it was obviously way too bright, so I ended up going in here and lowering the brightness just a little bit on this. And if we render it out now, you're going to see that this is going to look a lot better than it did in the animation. And in fact, I'll show you guys a cool trick. If you really want to just quickly preview what your animation is going to look like, I'll show you some pretty quick render settings you can set. There you can see it looks a lot more controlled now. I'll probably go in here and turn this up a little bit though. We'll do that really quickly here. So really, this is probably the most important step, honestly, right at the end, is really going in and tweaking every setting to make it look as good as possible. And we'll set this to maybe 2.5. It's hard to be able to tell until you render out an image what it's going to look like. Thankfully with Eevee it does render quite quickly, so you know, it's not hard to be able to get a bunch of render tests. There you can see it looks a lot better. You can definitely see that a lot more than you could before, and that looks better. So I definitely like that. One thing we could do, I believe, is if we go into the compositor, one little thing I forgot to show you guys. If you actually plug in the alpha of this into the factor of that, what happens when you put the blur in is it actually blurs the alpha as well. But if I put that into there, you should see that the color kind of sticks out a little bit more. So I'd probably recommend trying that, see how it comes out. But overall, I think that's going to be okay, just the way it is. All right, so now I'll show you guys how to do that quick render. If you want to do it super quick, what you can do just to test it, set this really low, 16, and for this particular example, honestly, the ambient occlusion and screen space reflections, to my knowledge, aren't really making that big of a difference. You know, we could go in here and turn a couple of these other settings down as well. Volumetrics, we'll just leave that on. Could probably turn down the samples. I won't do that. I'll turn down samples because it's probably doing some calculations for that. But really, as long as we get the bloom effect, you know, we can definitely control it. Speaking of which, you can definitely lower that bloom effect if it's a little bit too much. Like I might bring it down to 0.4. And we'll be able to see a little better. Anyways, so I think those settings will give us a better render. So what we can do is now, if we go into the render tab and we, instead of setting 1920 by 1080, if we set 25%, same exact settings, nothing special. Because we did that scale node, it should come out just fine. I'm just going to name this here. We'll call this preview render. And what you're going to see now, it took me now about a half hour to render the entire sequence before, but this should go super quick now. And see, it takes half a second per frame, so we got our image composited very quickly. Just needs to get up to 400 and then we're done. So if you have any experience using Blender cycles though, you know that this is crazy fast how fast it's going. So you know, definitely Eevee can take a little bit sometimes. You have more complicated scenes, but compared to cycles, it's pretty quick. So anyways, I'm just going to pause now, and we'll come back when this is all finished rendering, and we'll see if that looks better. All right, so that test render finished quite quickly. I think it only took about 49 seconds total. Pretty good, pretty good. So you know, here's the video here, and we'll see. But I believe that's a bit of an improvement. Obviously, it's a lot lower resolution, but you can see that this is definitely an improvement. So keep in mind, this one was pretty sloppy. I'll once again show you guys the final product of the loop here, just to remind you that, you know, that one was pretty sloppy, but you can get, oops, let me just turn off the audio. You can get much better results here. You can see this is the final rendered result of my original video before I did the tutorial, and looks a lot better. So you really do need to take your time, tweak all the settings, get the glow and the emission just right to bring out as much detail while still getting all these kind of cool effects onto it, and you'll get better results. So yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. There'll be definitely lots more tutorials coming very soon.